Nagato was named after an ancient Japanese province, but destined to become a modern legend at sea. She was a super-dreadnought battleship, constructed for the Imperial Japanese Navy and officially completed in November of 1920. From the moment her hull was laid down, she symbolized a major leap in Japan's maritime power. Though initially intended purely for battle, Nagato began her service by performing a vital humanitarian mission. In 1923, she sailed to deliver much-needed supplies to the survivors of the massive Great Kantō earthquake. This compassionate endeavor stood in stark contrast to the lethal potential hidden in her bristling guns and thick armor. During the mid-1930s, Nagato underwent an extensive modernization program. Her armor plating was strengthened, her engines upgraded, and her superstructure transformed into the distinctive pagoda mast style. Even though her path would include multiple conflicts, she only made a brief appearance in the Second Sino-Japanese War of 1937. Far more famously, Nagato served as the flagship for Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto during the planning phase of the Pearl Harbor attack in December of 1941. On that fateful occasion, she did not directly participate in shelling Pearl Harbor, but did help cover the withdrawal of the attacking forces. As the Pacific War escalated, Nagato was largely kept in home waters, honing the skills of her crew. She rarely fired her main guns in anger during the first 2 years of the war. Eventually, by mid-1943, she was transferred to Truk, a major Japanese stronghold in the Caroline Islands. It wasn't until the Battle of the Philippine Sea in mid-1944 that Nagato finally engaged in combat, though mostly under intense American air attacks. In October of that same year, the battleship would taste real naval gunfire, trading shell bursts with enemy vessels during the monumental Battle of Leyte Gulf. In that clash, she was only lightly damaged. But with Japan's reserves of oil dwindling, the Imperial Japanese Navy decided not to repair her fully. Her role changed drastically. Instead of venturing back to distant seas, Nagato was anchored near Japan's coastline, stripped down and transformed into a floating anti-aircraft platform. Much of her main artillery remained, but her focus was now on firing smaller caliber anti-aircraft batteries. Even when the skies darkened with American bombers in July of 1945, the battleship emerged with only superficial damage, further underscoring her remarkable resilience. By the war's conclusion, she stood as the only Japanese battleship still afloat. Yet peace would not grant her a graceful end. In mid-1946, the Americans selected Nagato as one of the target ships for Operation Crossroads, a series of nuclear weapons tests at Bikini Atoll. She was towed to the site, and during the first test, she only suffered minimal damage from the atomic blast. During the second test, however, this mighty vessel met her final demise, sinking to the depths in what would become a new era of warfare. Early design and dimensions. When first constructed, Nagato measured about 660 feet between perpendiculars and approximately 708 feet in overall length. Her beam was around 95 feet and her draft about 29 feet. She displaced roughly 32,200 long tons at standard load, escalating to 38,498 long tons at full load. As built, her crew numbered around 1,333 officers and enlisted men, and that figure climbed modestly over time to about 1,734 by 1944. By 1930, Nagato's original bow design was altered to lessen the spray she kicked up while steaming through heavy seas. During her 1934 to 1936 overhaul, the stern was lengthened by roughly 25 feet. Her forward superstructure was radically reshaped into a tall pagoda mast. Torpedo bulges were also added, increasing both her beam and her overall displacement. So much so that by the time her rebuild was complete, she weighed about 45,950 long tons when fully loaded. In a late war refit around November of 1944, Nagato's funnel top and the peak of her mainmast were removed to give her anti-aircraft guns a clearer arc of fire. This unconventional silhouette became a telling sign of just how much Japan's strategic situation had deteriorated. She needed every advantage she could manage, including better angles for her defense guns, given how relentless American carrier aircraft had grown. Power and propulsion. Originally, Nagato boasted 4 Gion-geared steam turbines powering 4 propeller shafts. These turbines produced around 80,000 shaft horsepower, drawing steam from 21 Kampon water tube boilers. Early in her career, she carried a mix of coal and oil. Her best range was about 5,500 nautical miles at 16 knots, an impressive feat for her day. During sea trials, she even reached speeds slightly above her design rating of 26.5 knots. But funnel smoke plagued her crew, sometimes blinding them on the bridge. Various modifications, like a funnel deflector in 1922, tried to solve the issue. Her 1920s and 1930s refits consolidated her boilers into purely oil-fired versions. Better turbines replaced older ones, reducing weight and increasing efficiency. By then, Nagato could store more fuel in newly fitted torpedo bulges, pushing her range to around 8,560 nautical miles at 16 knots. Armament evolution. Nagato's main battery comprised 8 16-inch guns, arranged in 4 twin turrets, 2 forward and 2 aft in a super-firing layout. These large guns initially had an elevation range from about -2 to +35 degrees, allowing them to lob shells around 2 rounds per minute. During the mid-1930s, she was refitted with turrets that had once been earmarked for other vessels. Those upgraded turrets could elevate up to 43 degrees, further enhancing her range to nearly 41,400 yards. Her secondary weapons consisted of 25.5-inch guns placed in casemates along the hull and superstructure. Over time, some of these guns were removed or altered to make way for newer dual-purpose artillery and more robust anti-aircraft weapons. Early on, Nagato possessed a small battery of 3-inch high-angle guns for anti-air work. As aviation threats escalated, she replaced them with twin 5-inch dual-purpose mounts. Her light anti-aircraft defenses also evolved, from older Vickers guns to more numerous, and in many respects more problematic, 25mm guns. While these light guns were standard in the Japanese fleet, they had reliability and magazine capacity issues that frequently limited their effectiveness. By 1944, the ship bristled with dozens of these guns, a reflection of Japan's urgent scramble to protect capital ships against Allied air power. Armor and protection. From the start, Nagato wore thick armor, 12 inches along the waterline belt, tapering at the bottom edge, and supplemented by a 9-inch strake above the belt. Her main deck was around 2 3/4 inches thick, while a lower deck measured about 3 inches. Turrets had 12 inches of face armor, with progressively thinner sides and roofs. The barbettes beneath the turrets were equally robust, ensuring that enemy shells had a difficult time reaching their magazines. During her reconstruction in the 1930s, Nagato's newly installed turrets received even heavier plating, over 18 inches on the front. Deck armor grew thicker in critical areas. As war approached, additional plates were installed around her barbettes to bolster protection against incoming shells. Fire control and radar. Nagato's initial fire control equipment, dating back to 1920, included a 10-meter optical rangefinder. As the 1920s gave way to the 1930s, more advanced devices were added, including new rangefinders in her turrets and a basic anti-aircraft director. By the mid-1930s, she tested Japan's Type 14 and Type 34 systems for better gunnery precision. With the looming threat of aerial warfare, specialized anti-aircraft directors were introduced, although these developments often lagged behind Allied radar technology. Aboard Nagato, radar made its first appearance in mid-1943, starting with a Type 21 air search system on top of her pagoda mast. As the war intensified, she gained additional surface search sets, Type 22, and Type 13 early warning radars around her mainmast, though Japanese radar technology generally remained behind that of the Allies. Aircraft handling. Years before fully operational carrier aviation changed naval warfare, Nagato experimented with launching and recovering float planes. In the 1920s, she briefly had a flying-off platform atop her forward turret, letting small float planes depart directly from the battleship's deck. This platform was soon removed, but a catapult and crane were added later between her mainmast and number 3 turret. Over time, she operated biplanes like the Nakajima E4N2 and E8N2. As technology advanced, she accommodated more modern floatplanes, including the Mitsubishi F1M by 1943. However, these floatplanes could do little when the tide of air power shifted so decisively in favor of the Allies. Construction and early career. Nagato's keel was laid on August 28, 1917. She was launched in November of 1919, then officially completed on November 15, 1920. Almost immediately, she found herself in the spotlight, serving as the flagship for various high-ranking admirals. Dignitaries like Marshal Joseph Joffre and Edward, Prince of Wales, paid her visits, a testament to Japan's rising naval prestige during the interwar years. Following the Great Kantō earthquake in 1923, Nagato took on a humanitarian role, carrying relief supplies to devastated regions. She also participated in sinking obsolete battleships like Satsuma for target practice, fulfilling treaty obligations under the Washington Naval Treaty. In the late 1920s and early 1930s, she was sometimes placed in reserve status or used as a gunnery training platform. By 1934, she entered a major modernization phase, emerging 2 years later, rearmed, rearmored, and restructured. She lent assistance during the Second Sino-Japanese War by transporting troops and even sending her float planes to bomb targets around Shanghai in August of 1937, though her involvement was relatively short-lived. Road to World War II. By late 1938 and into 1939, Nagato was again the combined fleet flagship and took part in a Grand Fleet Review in October of 1940. As global tensions soared, she was refitted once more. It was from her bridge in December of 1941 that Admiral Yamamoto famously signaled "Niitaka Yama no Bore," climb Mount Niitaka, giving the go-ahead for the attack on Pearl Harbor. While Nagato did not sail into the harbor itself, she served as cover for the carriers that launched Japan's aerial assault. The Midway and Truk chapters. During the pivotal Battle of Midway in June of 1942, Nagato was part of the main body that included the massive new battleship Yamato. The plan was for these battleships to engage any surviving American forces after Japan's carriers supposedly destroyed them. But Japan's carrier losses at Midway left Nagato with no opportunity for meaningful battle action. Instead, she assisted in transferring survivors from sunk carriers like Kaga. She remained in Japan for training and short refits until August of 1943, when she sailed to Truk. For a while, she shuttled between Truk, Eniwetok, and other bases to intercept American carrier raids, but saw little combat. Her presence was meant to deter American naval operations, though ultimately, the tide of war no longer favored battleship duels. Engagements in 1944. In early 1944, Nagato left Truk for Palau, and then moved to Linga near Singapore for more training. In June, she joined a battleship force under Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, hoping to disrupt American landings in the Mariana Islands. During the ensuing Battle of the Philippine Sea, Nagato provided escort for Japanese carriers, while unleashing specialized incendiary anti-air shells at American torpedo bombers. She claimed a few kills but escaped with minimal damage. Following the disastrous outcome for the Japanese carrier fleet, Nagato returned briefly to Kure for minor upgrades, mostly additional radar and anti-aircraft guns. Then, in July of 1944, she ferried troops to Okinawa before heading back to Linga, once again awaiting the inevitable confrontation with the U.S. Navy. Leyte Gulf and aftermath. By October of 1944, American forces landed in the Philippines. Japanese planners concocted Operation Show 1, intending to lure American carriers north while a battleship-heavy force under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita attacked vulnerable landing ships in Leyte Gulf. Nagato joined this center force, departing from Brunei Bay. In the Sibuyan Sea on October 24, 1944, she endured several waves of aerial attacks and took 2 bomb hits, losing about 52 men. Although battered, she pressed on to the battle off Samar the following day. During that desperate engagement, known for the heroism of American escort carriers and destroyers, Nagato fired her 16-inch guns at enemy vessels for the first time in her career. The chaotic nature of the fight, exacerbated by rain squalls and smoke screens, made accurate gunnery nearly impossible. She claimed to have damaged at least one cruiser, but confusion reigned on both sides. Admiral Kurita ultimately broke off the action, worried about looming air attacks, and the fleet retreated. Nagato received additional bomb damage, including a couple more casualties from near misses and sudden evasive maneuvers. Nevertheless, she made it back to Brunei and then to Japan, arriving in late 1944. Because fuel supplies were critically low and the strategic situation utterly dire, full repairs were dismissed as an impractical luxury. Nagato was effectively converted into a stationary anti-aircraft platform. She lost more of her secondary guns, gained extra smaller caliber weapons, and had her funnel and mainmast truncated to widen firing arcs. Final months of World War II, moored near Yokosuka by 1945, Nagato presented a curious sight. A once proud dreadnought, now stripped to essentials, her heavy guns lacking full power, and steam supplied from a small external boiler. Her crew size dwindled below 1,000. Despite minimal readiness, she endured an attack on July 18, 1945, by American carrier planes. Two 500-pound bombs struck, killing her captain and others. One bomb punctured a deck near the third turret, the second hit the conning tower's roof. Yet her hull remained largely intact. A feint was staged to trick American observers into believing she was sinking, and salt water was pumped into some compartments to make her ride lower in the water. As the war ended, American personnel boarded her on August 30, 1945. She was the only Japanese battleship still floating at that point. Stricken from the Navy list on September 15, 1945, Nagato would soon face a final, fateful journey. Operation Crossroads and sinking. Chosen as a test subject for Operation Crossroads, Nagato departed Yokosuka in mid-March of 1946, manned by a mostly American crew, supplemented by Japanese sailors who knew her systems. She could only manage 10 knots, and her hull still showed scars from bombing. The journey to Bikini Atoll was fraught with breakdowns and slow towing across the Pacific. Once in position, she waited as American test planners prepared 2 nuclear detonations. The first blast, codenamed Test Able on July 1st, was an airburst. Though well within its radius, Nagato sustained surprisingly minimal damage. When the second explosion, Test Baker, occurred underwater on July 25th, this time she was not so fortunate. A massive column of water and shockwaves battered her hull. Initially, she seemed to survive, listing only slightly, but steadily, water poured in, and by July 30th, the venerable dreadnought capsized and sank. In sinking at Bikini Atoll, Nagato marked the transition from old-style battleship warfare to the atomic age, a hulking testament to technological leaps that overshadowed the ironclads of bygone wars. Today, her wreck remains on the seafloor, providing an eerie diving destination for those curious about naval history. Because of her location and the circumstances of her demise, she holds a unique place in naval lore. A super-dreadnought that outlived an entire global conflict, only to meet its fate in humanity's next, more devastating wave of innovation. Throughout her service, Nagato personified the pride and complexities of the Imperial Japanese Navy. She witnessed humanitarian missions in her early days, overshadowed them with destructive might during conflict, and ultimately became a sort of test subject for nuclear power. Although she now rests underwater, her story continues to resonate with anyone fascinated by World War II, the evolution of battleship design, and the sobering arrival of nuclear technology. In every porthole and rivet, she carried the hopes of an empire at war and the stark lessons that followed its defeat. As we reflect on Nagato's incredible voyage, one that spans from humanitarian aid and epic battles to atomic annihilation, we unearth a moving chapter of World War II history. Her story reminds us that even the mightiest warships can be rendered obsolete by the relentless push of technology. Want to uncover more secrets of World War II? Dive in with us, subscribe, and let's explore the untold stories together. Share this journey with someone who cherishes military history and join our growing community of history adventurers. The road to hidden chapters and lesser-known World War II battles continues, and we invite you to be part of it.